The mansion stood in silence, its golden chandeliers casting soft light across the grand hall. Portraits of powerful ancestors lined the walls, each face painted with pride and permanence. Yet beneath all that wealth and grandeur, there was a heaviness, a secret no riches could hide. The echo of footsteps shattered the stillness. Clara, the young maid who had only begun working in the Alvarez estate a few days earlier, walked carefully across the marble floor. She carried a basket of freshly folded linen, her heart beating just a little faster than usual. Something about this house felt different. It wasn't the luxury, it was the atmosphere, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then it did. A sharp cry pierced the silence, not the playful laugh of a child or the stern voice of an elder, but something raw, jagged like pain-given sound. Clara turned sharply. Near the staircase, the young heir, Gabriel Alvarez, only 7 years old, had latched onto her wrist with shocking force, his small teeth pressed into her skin, and his grip was like steel. She gasped, dropping the linen. The boy's eyes burned with something deeper than mischief. It wasn't the tantrum of a spoiled child. It was fear, rage, sorrow all twisted together. Clara froze. She had been warned. The boy doesn't like strangers. He hasn't spoken in years. Don't upset him. But no one had told her this. No one had told her he could break like this. Gabriel, a voice shouted from the dining hall. Rosa, the cook, came rushing in, her hands trembling as she clutched her apron. Let go, you'll hurt her. The boy didn't let go. His jaw was locked, his small frame trembling as though he was fighting something invisible. Clara winced but didn't scream. Everyone expected her to panic, to shove him away. But something inside her told her to stay still. Instead of pulling back, she lowered herself to her knees so she could look into his eyes. His were not the eyes of a child who hated. They were the eyes of a child who had been left behind. It's all right, Clara whispered, her voice trembling yet steady. You don't have to fight me. The cook gasped. Don't talk to him. He doesn't understand words. But Clara ignored her. With her free hand, she slowly touched Gabriel's back, not forcing him, just letting him feel her presence. I know you're scared. I know something hurts. But you're not alone right now. I'm here. The boy's grip faltered. His eyes blinked, uncertain, as though her words reached somewhere deep inside. For the first time, hesitation flickered across his face. His teeth loosened. He pulled back, his lips trembling. And then he began to sob, not the loud, angry cries they had grown used to, not the hollow screams that echoed through the halls late at night. These were different. They were soft, fragile, the kind of tears that come when walls finally break down. Gabriel collapsed into Clara's arms. His small body shook against her chest, and his tears soaked through the thin fabric of her uniform. Clara held him tighter, her own eyes burning. She didn't know what had broken this child, but she knew one thing. No one had been there to hold him when he needed it most. Rosa covered her mouth with her hands, tears welling in her eyes. From the corner of the hall, Hector, the family's driver, lowered his cap in disbelief. 2 years, he whispered. It's been 2 years since that boy touched anyone. And on the second-floor balcony, his father, Alejandro Alvarez, stood frozen. His chest rose and fell in sharp bursts, his heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. He had watched his only son slip into silence after tragedy struck their family. Therapists, teachers, doctors all had failed to reach him. For 2 years, Gabriel had lived in his own world, untouchable. And now, in the arms of a maid he barely knew, he had finally broken. Alejandro gripped the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. Could it be real? Could healing really begin here, with this stranger? But not everyone believed. Behind Alejandro, a voice cut through the air, calm but edged with suspicion. This is unusual, too unusual. It was Isabella Vega, the child specialist hired months ago. She stepped forward, her sharp eyes fixed on Clara cradling Gabriel. Children don't change like this overnight. Not a child like him. Something doesn't add up. Alejandro turned sharply. What are you suggesting? She hesitated, lowering her voice. Be careful. Sometimes people provoke a storm just to play the savior. But Alejandro barely heard her. His gaze was locked on his son, the boy who had not smiled, spoken, or reached for anyone in years, clinging to a maid as though she were his only anchor in the world. And as Clara held Gabriel tighter, whispering words too soft for anyone else to hear, Alejandro felt something stir inside him that he thought he had lost forever, the fragile spark of hope. Yet in the shadows of the grand estate, not everyone welcomed this miracle, and what came next would test every bond, every truth, and every secret this family had buried. The night after the shocking scene in the Alvarez estate was one of restless silence. Clara sat in the tiny room at the far end of the servants' quarters, staring at her bandaged wrist. The marks from Gabriel's teeth were still fresh, but what haunted her wasn't the pain, it was the look in his eyes. That boy wasn't cruel. He wasn't dangerous. He was broken. Something inside him was screaming for help, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been placed in his path for a reason. As she lay on the thin mattress, the echo of Gabriel's sobs returned again and again, his small body trembling against her. The way his tears felt warm against her skin. She thought of her own past, memories she rarely allowed herself to touch, loss, loneliness. The nights she had cried with no one to hold her. Was that why she hadn't pulled away? Was that why she stayed when anyone else would have run? Upstairs, Alejandro Alvarez was not asleep either. He stood in the doorway of his study, a glass of untouched brandy on the desk. His gaze lingered on a photograph, his late wife, Camila, smiling with her arms around Gabriel as a baby. That smile had been the heartbeat of the house, and when the accident took her away, the walls had closed in. He had buried himself in business deals, in the empire his ancestors had built, while his son slipped further and further into silence. No money, no expert, no therapy had worked. He had feared the boy was lost forever, but that maid, in one moment, she had done the impossible. Alejandro's mind wrestled with disbelief. Could she truly reach Gabriel where no one else had? Or was it, as Isabella Vega suggested, some trick? Isabella had been dedicated, patient, thorough, yet in 6 months, Gabriel had barely looked at her. The thought that Clara, a stranger with no degree, could succeed where she failed lit a shadow of doubt in Alejandro's mind, and Isabella felt it. From her own quarters, the therapist stared into the mirror, anger flickering beneath her composed face. She remembered Gabriel's tiny smile, a miracle she had prayed for. But it wasn't her he smiled at, it was Clara. She clenched her fists. She had studied for years, given everything to her work, and now she was being eclipsed by someone with no training, no title, no reason to succeed. Why her? Isabella whispered into the empty room. Why not me? The next morning came with soft sunlight, pouring through tall windows. The staff moved about cautiously, whispering about what had happened. Rosa, the cook, crossed herself each time she mentioned it. The boy hugged her. She repeated in awe. He hugged her like she was his mother. Hector, the driver, simply shook his head. Miracle or not, the master won't know who to trust now. Clara stepped into the hall, pale but composed. Gabriel was already waiting. He stood at the far end, holding something in his hand. For the first time, he wasn't looking at the floor or retreating into a corner. His eyes were fixed on her. Slowly, he walked forward and held out the object. A toy car, its paint chipped, one wheel missing. Clara knelt. Is this for me? She asked gently. Gabriel nodded once. His lips parted as though he wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, he placed the car in her palm and then took her hand in both of his. From behind the columns, Alejandro watched silently. His heart ached as he witnessed a moment he had prayed for, his son choosing to reach out. But even as hope warmed his chest, a dangerous question loomed. Why Clara? What did she have that could pierce Gabriel's walls? Later that day, as Clara folded laundry near the garden, Alejandro approached. His presence was heavy, his voice steady but firm. Tell me the truth. How did you do it? What is it you gave my son that no one else could? Clara hesitated. How could she explain something she didn't fully understand herself? I didn't give him anything, sir, she whispered. I just listened. I let him be who he is without trying to fix him. She paused, looking down at her bandaged wrist. Sometimes pain doesn't need answers. It needs presence. Alejandro studied her with new eyes. There was no arrogance in her tone, no pride, only sincerity. Still, doubt tugged at him. Could it be that simple? Could years of grief and silence be eased by kindness alone? But before he could ask more, Gabriel appeared at the doorway, clutching a small set of colored cards Clara had made for him. On one card was a sun, on another a heart, on another a house. Gabriel lifted the heart card with trembling fingers and held it up for his father to see. Alejandro froze, his throat tight. For the first time in 2 years, his son was communicating, and in that fragile moment, Alejandro realized he was standing at the edge of something life-changing. But not everyone wanted it to happen. From across the room, Isabella Vega's eyes darkened as she watched the scene unfold. The maid was becoming the center of Gabriel's world and Alejandro's, and in Isabella's silence, something sharp began to take root, because sometimes the greatest battles are not fought with words or fists, but with envy hidden behind polite smiles. The following days at the Alvarez estate felt different, as though the house itself had taken a deep breath. After years of holding it in, the air was lighter, the halls less silent. The staff moved with a new rhythm, whispering about the boy who was changing before their very eyes. Gabriel no longer hid in dark corners or stared endlessly at the floor. He sought Clara out. He followed her from room to room, always with his toy car in hand, as though afraid she might disappear if he let her out of his sight. Clara, though still surprised by the sudden bond, welcomed him with patience. She taught him small things, not lessons from a book, but lessons from the heart. When she watered the flowers by the garden, she placed the watering can in his small hands and guided him gently. When she folded sheets, she showed him how to smooth the corners. Little by little, he mirrored her movements. It was as if Gabriel had found, for the first time, a rhythm that made sense to him. But not everyone celebrated. From the second-floor balcony, Isabella Vega watched carefully, her sharp eyes following every gesture. She noted the way Gabriel's gaze softened when Clara spoke, how he laughed for the first time when Clara let him chase a butterfly through the rose bushes. Isabella's jaw tightened. 6 months of careful study, 6 months of strategies and structured sessions, and the boy had given her nothing. And now, in mere days, this maid had undone everything. That it wasn't fair. One evening, when Alejandro returned from a long meeting in the city, Isabella seized her moment. She met him in the library, where the scent of leather-bound books and age-wood always lingered. Her tone was calm, almost professional, but her eyes glowed with urgency. Sigor Alvarez, she began, I've been watching Gabriel's sudden change, and while it seems positive, I must warn you it's dangerous to believe in miracles too quickly. Alejandro looked up from the file in his hands. Dangerous? My son is smiling for the first time in years. How can that be dangerous? Because children don't heal overnight. Isabella pressed. Real progress is slow, steady, measured. This, she waved her hand in the air, is too fast. Something isn't right. Either the boy is being manipulated, or he's attaching himself in a way that could end in disaster. Alejandro's brow furrowed. He wanted to dismiss her words, but her tone carried the weight of reason. He had seen his son regress before, had felt hope crumble into dust too many times. Could it be true? Could this fragile light vanish just as quickly as it came? Yet his heart told him something else. He had seen the way Clara looked at Gabriel, not with pity, not with strategy, but with genuine care. It was a look Alejandro hadn't seen since his wife Camila was alive. Still, Isabella's warning planted a seed of doubt. That night, Clara sat in the servants' dining room, a candle burning low as she stitched a tear in her uniform. Rosa, the cook, sat across from her, sipping tea. The older woman leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You've brought something back into this house, Niga. I haven't seen the master this alive in years, but be careful. Not everyone here wants you to succeed. Clara looked up, surprised. What do you mean? Rosa sighed. You're new. You don't see it yet. But Miss Vega, she's not happy. She's been here half a year, and the boy never even looked her way. Now you come, and suddenly he laughs. He cries. He speaks with his eyes. Do you think her pride can swallow that? Clara lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around the fabric. She didn't want enemies. She had only wanted a job, a roof, a chance to rebuild her life quietly. But fate had placed her in Gabriel's path, and now there was no turning back. The very next morning, proof of Rose's warning appeared. Clara walked into the playroom to find Gabriel sitting on the floor, with a set of brightly colored cards scattered around him. But something was wrong. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't curious. His hands shook as he clutched one card tightly. The heart. His wide eyes darted to Clara the moment she entered. Filled with something between panic and pleading, she knelt beside him. "Gabriel, what is it?" He thrust the heart card toward her, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Clara placed her hand gently over his. "You're safe. I'm here." Slowly, his breathing steadied, and he pressed his forehead against her shoulder. Clara closed her eyes, realizing how fragile his trust still was. Behind them, Isabella stood. In the doorway, her lips pressed into a thin line. She had been in the room moments before Claire arrived, trying once again to coax the boy into her structured games. But the moment Clara appeared, Gabriel had clung to her as though she were the only one who mattered. Isabella's face hardened. She turned sharply and left the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor like cracks forming in ice. Later, Alejandro approached Clara in the hall. His expression was thoughtful, conflicted. "Clara," he said slowly, "I don't know how you're reaching him, but I can't deny what I see. He's coming back to me, little by little. For that, I owe you more than words can say." Clara shook her head. "Don't thank me. Thank him. He's the one choosing to come back." But Alejandro's eyes lingered on her longer than before, searching, questioning. Who was this young woman who could touch the heart of his son when the rest of the world had failed? And in that silent question, a new tension was born, one that Isabella, watching from the shadows, would not allow to grow unchecked. For in a house filled with wealth and secrets, not every battle would be fought in the open. Some wars would begin quietly, with whispers, doubts, and the slow unraveling of trust. And Clara had just stepped into the center of it all. The morning sun spilled across the Alvarez estate, gilding the marble floors with a glow too beautiful for the tension that lived inside its walls. Clara woke earlier than the others, slipping quietly into the garden with a basket of laundry. She liked the stillness before the house came alive, the quiet hum of birds, the smell of dew on the roses, the brief illusion that this grand mansion was just an ordinary home. But deep down, she knew there was nothing ordinary about this place. Nothing ordinary about the child who clung to her as if she were his lifeline. And nothing ordinary about the shifting eyes that watched her from the shadows. She set the laundry basket down and bent to pick a fallen rose petal from the grass. A memory flashed through her mind, unbidden. Another garden, another time. A small hand clutching hers, a laugh like bells, and then silence. Clara pressed her lips together and forced the memory back down. She could not afford to let her past bleed into this house. Here she had a new beginning, a fragile one, but a beginning nonetheless. By mid-morning, Gabriel found her, as he always did. He carried the heart card again, his favorite, but this time he added the sun card, holding both out as if they carried a secret meaning only she could understand. Clara knelt, her smile soft. "You're happy today?" she asked, pointing to the sun. Gabriel nodded, then touched the heart. His eyes searched hers, shy but insistent. Clara's chest tightened. In that simple gesture, he was telling her more than words ever could. From the second-floor window, Alejandro Alvarez watched. He had postponed his morning meeting just to stand there longer, silently observing. The way Clara moved with his son unsettled him in ways he could not explain. She wasn't trained, yet she was teaching Gabriel things no professional had managed. She wasn't family, yet Gabriel clung to her as though she belonged. Alejandro turned away, his throat dry. He could not allow himself to feel too much, not after years of burying his heart. But still, the sight of them lingered, planting questions he wasn't ready to face. Down in the study, Isabella Vega closed her notebook with a snap. She had been documenting Gabriel's progress since her arrival, charts, observations, countless pages of analysis. And now, in just weeks, Clara had overturned it all. Isabella's hands trembled as she straightened the papers. This wasn't about the boy anymore. It was about her place in this house, her years of study, her dignity. If she lost Alejandro's trust, she lost everything. Her chance came that afternoon. Alejandro called a staff meeting in the grand hall, his voice measured, his presence commanding. "I've seen changes in my son I never thought possible," he said, "and I want to ensure we support his progress, whatever it takes." His gaze shifted briefly toward Clara, and though he didn't say her name, everyone knew. Rosa smiled behind her hand. Hector nodded respectfully, but Isabella felt her chest burn. "Sigor Alvarez," she said, her tone calm but her eyes sharp. "With respect, I must caution you. Sudden change can be dangerous. Gabriel may be attaching himself too strongly, and if that attachment breaks, the consequences could be worse than before." The room fell into silence. Clara felt the weight of every eye on her. She lowered her gaze, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Alejandro's expression darkened, but he said nothing. After the meeting, Clara slipped into the servants' quarters, her chest heavy. She didn't want to be the source of conflict. She had come here for work, not war. Rosa followed her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Don't let her words wound you. The boy needs you. Anyone with eyes can see it." That evening, as the sky bled into shades of purple and gold, Gabriel sat beside Clara in the garden. He traced patterns in the dirt with his toy car. Humming softly to himself, Clara leaned against the stone bench, watching him. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe, to feel something she hadn't felt in years: peace. But peace never lasted long in the Alvarez estate. Later that night, when Clara returned to her small room, she found something strange. Her bag, which she always kept tucked beneath her bed, had been moved. The zipper was slightly open. Her heart pounded as she pulled it out and searched inside. Her old notebook was missing, the one she carried everywhere, filled with pages of her own thoughts, her sketches, and the fragments of a story she never told anyone. Panic swept through her. That notebook was her past, her only secret. She rushed into the hall, but the corridor was empty. Somewhere in the vast house, her private world was no longer hers. Upstairs, Isabella sat in her own room, flipping through the pages of Clara's notebook. Her lips curled into a cold smile as she scanned the words pain, grief, loss, written in a trembling hand. So this maid had scars, too. Scars that could be twisted into questions, into accusations. She closed the notebook, her plan already forming. The game had changed. Clara wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a threat, and Isabella would not allow herself to lose to her. Not in this house. Not in front of Alejandro. Not when the boy's fragile heart was finally waking from silence. In the quiet of the night, Gabriel stirred from his sleep, sensing something he could not name. He clutched the heart card against his chest, whispering the sound of a word he had not spoken aloud in years. His lips moved slowly, shakily, but the word carried the weight of everything he longed for: Mama. And though no one heard him, the sound marked the beginning of a storm that would soon consume the Alvarez estate. The Alvarez estate no longer breathed with the same silence it once did. Something was shifting, invisible but undeniable. The servants whispered in corridors about miracles and curses, about how the boy had come back to life only to place everyone on edge. At the heart of it all stood Clara, the maid who never sought to be more than what she was, and yet who had become the center of a storm she could not control. The next morning began with laughter. Soft, broken, but real. Gabriel sat cross-legged in the playroom, a row of his favorite cards spread before him. He held up the heart card and then the sun card, his lips curving upward in a smile that still surprised everyone who saw it. Rosa wiped her hands on her apron as tears ran freely down her cheeks. Hector leaned on the doorframe, shaking his head in disbelief. "Dios mío," Rosa whispered, clutching at her chest. "I never thought I'd hear that sound again. A child should laugh like that every day." Clara knelt beside Gabriel, her hand brushing lightly over his hair. "You're doing so well," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if he understood her words or only her tone. His small hand reached for hers, his touch hesitant but warm. What Clara didn't know was that outside the door, Alejandro was watching again. He had told himself he wouldn't linger in shadows anymore. But each day he found himself drawn to these quiet moments. To see his son alive again, it was worth more than all the wealth stored in his vaults. Yet each time his gaze shifted to Clara, a heaviness weighed on him. Why her? Why had fate chosen her to open the door that no one else could unlock? By noon, his question began to take form in ways he hadn't expected. Isabella entered his study. Her steps measured, her face unreadable. She placed a small object on his desk, Clara's notebook. Alejandro stared at it, confused. "What is this?" Her words, Isabella said smoothly. "Her secrets. I found it left carelessly in the hall." He frowned, opening the notebook cautiously. The handwriting was uneven, sometimes trembling, as though written in moments of pain. He read fragments. "Loss I can't forget, the screams that never leave me. If only I had held on tighter." His chest tightened. "This doesn't concern Gabriel, doesn't it?" Isabella's voice softened, laced with poison. "She has wounds, Alejandro, wounds as deep as his. Do you really want someone unstable, caring for your son? What happens when her own ghosts resurface? What happens when she breaks?" Alejandro closed the notebook quickly, unwilling to let her words sink deeper. But the seed was planted, and Isabella knew it. That evening, Clara sensed something had changed. Alejandro avoided her eyes during dinner, speaking briefly to the staff but never once addressing her directly. Gabriel noticed, too. He kept pulling at Clara's sleeve, showing her his cards with more urgency than usual, as though afraid she might vanish if he let go. Later, as the house quieted, Clara sat in her room, staring at the empty space beneath her bed, where her notebook should have been. Her chest tightened with panic. She hadn't misplaced it. Someone had taken it, and if they had read it, they knew too much. The thought made her stomach churn. That notebook was the one place she had poured everything she couldn't say aloud. The accident that had stolen her younger brother from her, the guilt she carried every waking day, the reason she had left home in search of silence. The door creaked open. Gabriel stood there, clutching the heart card. His eyes looked wide, frightened. Clara bent down to him, her voice steady even though her hands shook. "What's wrong?" Instead of answering, he reached up and touched her face, pressing the heart card against her cheek. Clara felt her throat tighten. The boy who had not spoken in years was finding ways to say the things he didn't have words for. He was telling her, in his way, that he trusted her, that he needed her. And then, so softly she almost thought she imagined it, Gabriel whispered a sound. His lips formed a broken syllable, his voice cracking like dry wood. "Caw." Clara froze. Her breath caught in her chest. He tried again, his brow furrowed, determination flashing in his small eyes. "Clara." It was faint, shaky, but real. The boy had spoken her name. Her tears came before she could stop them. She wrapped her arms around him, trembling as his tiny voice echoed in her ears. "You did it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You spoke." But as joy filled her, a shadow moved across the hall. Isabella had heard everything. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. The boy had spoken at last. And it wasn't for her, it was for Clara. Later, Alejandro sat alone in the study with Clara's notebook unopened on the desk. He had wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but something inside him resisted. He thought of Gabriel's smile, of the sound of laughter he hadn't heard in years. He thought of the way Clara never asked for thanks, never sought recognition, and he wondered if perhaps the pain in her past wasn't a weakness, but the very reason she could see into his son's heart. Still, the doubt lingered. Trust was fragile, and envy moved like smoke through the estate, unseen but suffocating. Clara, unaware of the battle being waged around her, sat awake long after Gabriel had fallen asleep. She touched the heart card he had pressed into her hand, her tears drying on her cheeks. For the first time in years, she felt the faint stir of something she thought she had lost forever: hope. But hope, in a house filled with secrets, could be as dangerous as it was beautiful, and before long, the truth she carried inside her would no longer stay hidden. The Alvarez estate had never known such fragile stillness. Every corner of the house seemed to hold its breath, as if the very walls knew something was coming. Clara felt it in her chest, A quiet storm gathering, though she tried to carry on with her daily tasks as if nothing had changed. Gabriel followed her closely that morning, clutching the heart card, his small hand brushing against her skirt each time she moved. He no longer hid from the world, he clung to her instead. And every time his lips formed her name, every time his soft voice whispered Clara, the air around them grew heavier with wonder and fear. But joy was rarely left unchallenged in this house. By midday, Alejandro summoned Clara to the library. The tall shelves towered over her as she entered, the smell of leather and polished wood filling the silence. Alejandro stood near the window, his back turned, one hand resting on Clara's notebook, the very one she had been searching for desperately. Her heart lurched. "Is this yours?" he asked without looking at her. Clara froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to lie, to say no, but she could not. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes, it is." Finally, Alejandro turned. His eyes searched hers, sharp and questioning. "I read some of it. Pain, loss, guilt, things no one here knows. Why hide it? Why keep secrets under my roof?" Clara's hands trembled at her sides. "Because it was never meant for anyone else. Those words, they're all I had left of my brother." She lowered her gaze, her voice breaking. "When I was 17, I was supposed to watch him. He slipped away near the river. I couldn't save him. Since that day, I've carried the guilt. I thought if I buried myself in work, in silence, maybe I could forget. But I can't. I never will." Alejandro's chest tightened. He wanted to stay guarded, but her voice carried no deception, only raw truth. He set the notebook down, his face softer now. "You think this makes you weak," he said quietly. "But maybe this is what makes you strong. You know grief. You recognize it in my son, because you've carried it yourself." Clara's eyes filled with tears. But before she could respond, the library door opened. Isabella stepped inside, her tone polite but her gaze sharp as glass. "I see you've discovered the maid's secrets," she said smoothly. "Now you understand why I warned you. She's unstable, Sigor Alvarez. She's dangerous for the boy." Clara's breath caught. "That's not true," Isabella cut her off. "He doesn't need a maid with her own traumas. He needs a professional who understands him, who won't collapse under the weight of her past. She's using her pain to make herself seem indispensable." Alejandro's jaw tightened. "Enough, Isabella," but she pressed on, her voice rising with the desperation she could no longer hide. "Can't you see? You're letting your son's fragile progress blind you. What happens when she leaves? What happens when she breaks again? Gabriel will collapse with her, and you'll lose him all over." Clara's chest ached, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to take anyone's place. I only wanted to be here for him. That's all." At that moment, a sound broke the tension. From the doorway, Gabriel stood clutching the heart card. His small voice, though weak, cut through the air. "No." Everyone froze. The boy's lips trembled, but his eyes burned with determination. "Clara, stay." Alejandro's breath caught as his son spoke, not in whispers, not in broken fragments, but with clarity born of desperation. He stepped forward, his tiny hand reaching for Clara. "Clara, my heart." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks as she knelt to gather him in her arms. His words were imperfect, but they carried the weight of truth no one could deny. Alejandro's decision was made in that instant. He turned to Isabella, his voice firm. "You've worked hard, and I thank you for your time here. But my son has chosen, and I will not take from him the one person who has given him back his voice." Isabella's face drained of color. She tried to speak, but no words came. Her pride, her months of effort, her place in this house, all of it had shattered in a single moment. Without another word, she turned sharply and left the room, her heels echoing against the marble like a final warning dot in the silence that followed. Alejandro knelt beside his son and Clara. Gabriel looked at him, his small fingers clutching both their hands. For the first time in years, Alejandro allowed himself to weep, not out of despair, but out of hope. He wrapped his arms around them, both holding tightly as if afraid the moment would vanish. Clara closed her eyes, her heart breaking open under the weight of it all. She had come to this house seeking nothing more than work. Instead, She had found a boy who healed parts of her she thought were gone forever, and a father who saw strength where she had only seen shame, the storm that had loomed so long over. The Alvarez estate was finally breaking, not through wealth, not through expertise, but through love that dared to stay, even when it hurt. And as Gabriel whispered Clara's name again, his small voice steady this time, it was clear that the walls of silence were crumbling for good. The house, once cold and lifeless, had found its heartbeat again.